Hello, everybody. What's up out in video land? I hope you're having a great day. And today, I am bringing you another reaction video. Now, I know reaction videos are kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Pretentious? Is that even a word? Pretentious? No. Um, People argue about reaction content a lot. And I can see where they're coming from. A lot of people call it the laziest content on YouTube, and I don't know if I agree with that, but I can see why they would come to that conclusion. For me, reaction content is fantastic because I have trouble coming up with my own ideas. I don't know what it is about me. I guess I'm just not creative in that way. But if I have a topic in front of me that's being discussed, well, then I suddenly have ideas. Then I can suddenly offer my own insight, my own opinions, and my own takes on it. So in that regard, reaction content is wonderful for me because, again, I have trouble coming up with my own ideas. But if I have something to talk about, then I'll talk your ear off about it. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to check out a video by Kyle Hill. And as always, description for everything description. The link for everything I react to is going to be in the bottom. You didn't know this was a professional show, did you? Anyway, the link for the video is below. I recommend you check out Kyle Hill. He does a lot of sciencey stuff. And today we're going to talk about the Demon Core. Now, I know about the Demon Core already from previous research. It's essentially a nuclear core that was made to be the third atomic bomb that the United States was going to drop on Japan. Thankfully, we never had to. But they did a lot of research and they did a lot of experiments on this to kind of find out how it ticked because, again, nuclear science was in its infancy in the 40s and 50s. So there was quite a bit we didn't know. So they did a lot of tests and they did a lot of experiments. And the reason why this is called the Demon Core is because it had a rather infamous reputation for killing people. And we're going to find out through the video. So let's get it started. Oh, I'm sorry. Technical difficulties. I forgot to adjust my speakers. Hold on 1 second. Again, professional show, didn't you know?
In 1946, a P-239 plutonium core scheduled for detonation by nuclear bomb was harmlessly melted down and reintegrated into the United States' nuclear stockpile.
Oh, and I have to state, as always, everything that I react to, I am going to be pausing frequently to give my own insights, to give my own take, to make it that transformative content so YouTube doesn't yell at me and do mean things to me.
That was the end of a 14-pound metallic sphere that had killed 2 scientists not 11 months before. This is the true story of the Demon Core.
Radiation is fascinating to me.
The spheres of atomic material that had obliterated the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have easily fit in your hand, and they were light enough to carry.
Now, a quick note about the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I personally hold the belief that the United States should have been tried for crimes against humanity. Simply because the dropping of the atomic bomb did not distinguish between civilian and military targets. The excuse was, well, there's weapons factories in those 2 cities. And while that may have been true, they wiped out the whole city. They didn't just wipe out the factories. So, again, it's my personal opinion that the United States committed some severe war crimes.
Because of the extreme levels of radiation coming from them, the cores were carried around in secure containers, but curious physicists reported that the cores were disturbingly warm to the touch. Both the Little Boy and Fat Man nuclear bombs use subcritical masses of uranium and plutonium respectively, meaning that no self-sustaining nuclear reaction would be possible with the spheres alone, and the nickel plating that covered them would prevent most of the escaping radiation from harming you. The real harm comes later.
From a nuclear detonation, at least the old way they used to do it, I don't know if modern nuclear weapons still do the same thing, but old school nuclear, excuse me, nuclear bombs detonated about 100 feet off the ground. And it's not contrary to popular belief, it's not the actual explosion that kills you, although that is a rather large explosion. It is the gigantic pressure wave that is caused by the nuclear explosion. It's basically this concussive blast wave that shoots out in all directions and just destroys anything it touches. If you've ever seen the movie Terminator 2 Judgment Day, they actually have the most accurate depiction of what a nuclear bomb will do to you ever put to film. And granted, it's a piece of fiction, but James Cameron got the nuclear explosion perfect. In fact, a nuclear agency actually wrote James Cameron a letter thanking him for making the most accurate depiction of a nuclear explosion on film.
The terrible explosions that Little Boy and Fat Man are famous for only happen when a nuclear core goes critical, using directed conventional explosives to artificially induce a critical mass. This meant literally compressing a plutonium or uranium sphere into a much smaller volume with explosions. Now, neutrons emitted from natural radioactivity would be much more likely to go on and impact other atoms before escaping, leading to a chain reaction of exponentially more and more atoms releasing tremendous energy.
So
At
it's
the
an
heart of an atomic
implosion
blast is
and
a
then an
radioactive
explosion.
core filled with atoms poised like rat traps. All the bomb itself does is force one of those traps to snap.
Tickling the dragon's tail.
The so-called Demon Core was the third core of fissionable nuclear material made during the World War II era. It was also supposed to be dropped on Japan, but after the Empire's prompt
Yep, like I
surrender
said.
following the obliteration of Nagasaki, the core had no immediate military use. Instead, a physicist working at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico after the war decided to use the remaining core to figure out just what it takes to make a core like this go critical. When Otto Robert Frisch first arrived in the United States, he was placed at Los Alamos to study neutron multiplication in uranium and plutonium. These elements naturally radiate neutrons in the process of nuclear decay, and as we said, if there is enough of the radioactive element close enough together, these neutrons can go on to cause the rat trap style reaction as neutrons slam more neutrons free from other atoms.
And this is the basis for modern nuclear weapons, which is why they're much smaller. And we're able to carry multiple nuclear warheads on one missile because they figured out you didn't need this big explosion, or rather implosion, to create this chain reaction. Which is, this right here is why modern nuclear weapons are far, far more dangerous than their older 40s and 50s counterparts.
However, there is another way to force criticality other than just having a giant sphere of plutonium, which would be hard to make. It turns out that if you use a very thick material to reflect neutrons coming out of the material back upon itself, like a mirror would, a self-sustaining reaction can occur with substantially less plutonium or uranium. Even though an explosion might not happen after criticality is reached in all cases, a deadly
Still
blast
gonna
of
get
radiation
radiation,
certainly
yeah.
could. And that's exactly what happened.
And again, if you don't manufacture this properly enough, you get what's called a dirty bomb, which basically just, the explosion is much more limited and much less powerful in scope, but much, much more radiation is released. That's what we're afraid of, countries like Iran and North Korea and countries like that. This is what we're afraid of them developing. Not necessarily a nuclear weapon that can destroy cities, but a dirty bomb that can just irradiate everything.
By 1944, Frisch was leading the Critical Assembly Group at Los Alamos and started a dangerous series of near-criticality testing. The physicists in the group wanted to use neutron-reflective materials around spheres of plutonium and uranium to see just how close they could get to going critical, without explosives and without going over the edge. Commenting on the inherent risk of experiments of this kind, legendary physicist Richard Feynman reportedly said that the experiments were like, quote, tickling the tail of a sleeping dragon, end quote. But even with the very
In other
real
words, not a good
possibility of
idea.
being roasted alive by the radioactive fire of a failed criticality test, the tickling the dragon's tail experiments continued. Within 2 years, neutron reflection experiments on the Demon Core would claim the lives of two scientists, Harry Daghlian Jr. and Louis Slotin, in almost the exact same way. On August 21, 1945, Harry Daghlian Jr. was conducting a criticality experiment with the Demon Core. He was placing tungsten carbide bricks around the mass of plutonium to see how many bricks and in what orientation it would take to reflect enough neutrons to cause the core to go critical. That afternoon, using a Geiger counter-like device to measure the radiation coming off of the plutonium, he got close enough to criticality that he decided to end the experiment. Now, this result should have been worth
this just got too dangerous.
Streaks in a notebook and maybe a beer at the local bar with the other physicists, but Daghlian was curious. Later that night, he returned.
And what does curiosity do to the cat, ladies and gentlemen?
Alone to his assembly for another test. Like the tests before, Daghlian created an orientation of bricks that his measuring device told him was nearly critical. As he was placing one last brick, the measuring device indicated that the core would go critical if he continued on the assembly. The dragon would wake up. So cautiously, he began removing the final brick, and then he dropped it.
Oops.
The moment the brick hit the assembly, the Demon Core instantly went supercritical. And according to Daghlian, there was a blast of blue light and a wave of heat.
Contrary to popular belief, we think of radiation as green. It's all in pop culture and movies and video games and stuff that, radioactive means green. No. When something goes supercritical like that, you actually see a blue flash of light.
Daghlian reacted quickly, though, and used his right hand to knock the dropped brick all the way to the floor. In those fractions of a second, Harry had received a fatal dose of radiation.
Just imagine, this is something our human brains cannot wrap around. When we think of something killing you, killing a human being, we think of a disease, some type of sickness that takes months, maybe even years to run its course, or some sort of physical damage that the body just cannot repair itself from. It's beyond our comprehension that touching something for a fraction of a second leads to your death. That is just so beyond our thinking. And this is what makes radiation so nasty. Just physical contact for a split second was enough to kill you.
In fact, he had endured what was likely the highest acute dose of radiation of any human in history. 25 days later, Daghlian fell into a coma and died from organ failure.
What he's blurring out here is a picture of his hand, his right hand that touched the core, that is completely irradiated and mutilated, and you can kind of see the dark bits around the center where the skin is just falling off his hand.
Owing to severe radiation poisoning. This photo, taken 9 days after the accident by medical staff, is of the hand that Harry had
he didn't
used
blur
to
it
stop
out.
the
Yeah,
Demon
look
Core.
at that. Oh my god.
He was 24. Harry wasn't completely alone and experimenting in the lab that night. A security guard, Private Robert J. Hemmerly, was also sitting at his desk next to Daghlian reading his newspaper. Hemmerly died 33 years after Daghlian Jr. from what is now considered to be radiation-caused leukemia.
Hemmerly's desk was roughly 10 or so feet away. And it took 33 years, but the Demon Core claimed his life as well.
He was 29 and the father of 2 at the time of exposure. Harry Daghlian Jr. was the first official fatality from a criticality accident and the first American casualty of the atomic age.
Though not in uniform,
he had arranged to
died
have
in
his
service
body
to his
donated to
country.
science after his inevitable end, so that scientists could study the effects of radiation exposure on the human body. During the 25 days after his fatal mistake, Daghlian's colleague Louis Slotin spent many hours at his bedside, comforting the 24-year-old as radiation poisoning slowly claimed him. Exactly 7 months later, in the same hospital, Louis Slotin would suffer the exact same fate. By 1946, physicist Louis Slotin had taken over the critical assembly group from Frisch. Though the criticality experiments were moved from the Omega site at Los Alamos to the Palajito laboratory, the dangerous nature of the experiments
Los Alamos
did not
is where it all
change.
started. That's where
In
the
addition to
Manhattan Project
Feynman's
was.
continued warnings, physicist Enrico Fermi said that, quote, "Keep doing that experiment that way, and you'll be dead within a year." But Louis Slotin wasn't worried, and the
He
experiments
should have
continued.
been.
On May 21st, 1946, Slotin was conducting another criticality experiment with the Demon Core. This time, though, instead of using tungsten bricks, Slotin was testing the critical point of the core by placing it inside two half spheres made of beryllium and lowering those halves until there was just a sliver of space before the sphere was complete. If the core was completely enclosed, the reflection of neutrons would be total, and the dragon would wake again. The local expert among experts, Slotin was reportedly brash in his experimental protocols. In his signature pair of blue jeans and cowboy boots, Slotin would perform the criticality tests without the fail-safe spacers that would sit on the half spheres and keep it from ever completely closing.
Now, I don't think I have to say how absolutely stupid this was. It's amazing to me that such brilliant minds sometimes completely disregard common sense. Doing this experiment without the fail-safes was completely stupid, and it was only a matter of time before this inevitably happened. So let that be a lesson to you. Let that be a lesson to all you scientists and future scientists out there. Do not ignore lab safety.
Instead, he would put his bare hand on the top half sphere and attempt to lower it using only the blade of a flathead screwdriver. That way, he could get much closer to criticality. And Slotin had successfully completed this experiment dozens of times.
Doing the experiment this way is no different than playing Russian roulette. It's only a matter of time.
The afternoon of the accident, Louis Slotin was conducting the same screwdriver experiment as 7 other colleagues recorded and watched. It was just like the test before, but for whatever reason, this time, the screwdriver slipped. The moment the spheres touched, the demon core went prompt critical. The reflected neutrons coming from the plutonium inside the sphere instantly initiated supercriticality. Like the Daghlian accident, there was a flash of blue light and a wave of the dragon's heat before Slotin could flip the top half sphere off of the assembly. Naturally, the 7 other scientists in the room ran out as fast as they could as the accident occurred, but Slotin shouted them all to get back and tossed them a stick of chalk. He told them each to mark down precisely where they were standing. By establishing their positions relative to the demon core, Slotin would be able to calculate just how much radiation each person had just absorbed, and how much their lives had just been shortened.
Can you imagine an accident so terrible that depending on where you were standing in the room dictates how long you get to live?
According to physicist Ramer Schreiber, who was present in the room with Slotin that day, Slotin's first words immediately after the incident were, quote,
Well, that's it then.
that does it."
Well, that does it.
Louis Slotin died of severe radiation poisoning 9 days later at the age of 35. He died in the same hospital as Harry Daghlian Jr. on another Tuesday the 21st as a result of the same accident with the same hunk of radioactive material. They even were cared for by the same nurse. The demonstration that day was supposed to be the final demonstration with the core before it was used in a test detonation, and it was. In those few moments, Louis Slotin had been exposed to over 1,000 rads of radiation from the neutrons and gamma rays blasting out of the demon core. This is possibly the highest dose of radiation any human has ever taken. As a comparison, 1,000 meters from ground zero in Hiroshima, the neutron radiation was measured as less than half of what Slotin had absorbed in those fractions of a second. Since 1945, over 60 criticality accidents have been recorded, leading to at least 21 deaths in facilities and labs all around the world. The flash of blue light that so often accompanies these incidents is an indication of the invisible radiation being released. As high-energy particles crash through the air, like these particles exiting a cyclotron, they excite the air molecules. The only way for these molecules to return to a lower energy state is to release some radiation of their own, photons of light. But while gases can absorb and re-emit,
So in Star Trek, um, the popular weapon is photon torpedoes. They got the color completely wrong. They're not. They shouldn't be red. They should be glowing blue, like this.
the energy imparted to it by nuclear material, human bodies cannot. Instead, particles and gamma rays flying out of the nuclear cores rip electrons from the molecules that make you up and smash your
Radiation literally destroys your DNA.
cellular machinery beyond repair. When enough molecular damage is done, radiation sickness can manifest itself as everything from vomiting and diarrhea to blisters, inflammation, impaired cognition, widespread organ failure, confusion, nausea, high fever, dizziness.
And what a lot of people don't realize or don't consider is there is never any blah, blah, blah. Would help if I could talk today. There is never zero radiation. No matter where you go on planet Earth, there is always some radiation. In fact, when scientists calibrate a Geiger counter, they need to do it in like a lead-filled room, or where I live in New York, there is a lab called and I can't think of the name. Anyway, there's a rather famous lab here in New York, in Albany, in the state's capital, where they, in order to calibrate their Geiger counters, they need to go down 5 floors into the sub basement, and they have an old hull of an old submarine, and that's where they calibrate the Geiger counters, because that's the only place that they can get zero radiation. Now, the human body can actually absorb quite a bit of radiation, but it has to be over a prolonged period. The human body cannot withstand a huge dose all at once. But during a prolonged period, the human body is actually quite resistant to radiation. The Wadsworth Center, that's the name of the lab. Just came to me.
5 weeks later, on July 1st, 1946, a different nuclear core was destroyed in a 23-kiloton air-deployed nuclear weapon over Bikini Atoll. It was supposed to be the end of the Demon Core. Instead, the Demon Core was melted down and redistributed throughout the rest of the United States stockpile, effectively getting a brand new half-life.
It's almost like a monster that you read out of like a storybook or something. They had to cut it up in pieces and send it in several different places so it stopped killing people.
Until next time. Yeah, story time with Kyle's a little serious, huh? Thank you so much to the very nerdy staff at the facility for their direct and substantial support in the creation of this here video. Today especially, I want to recognize research assistant Roydon Houghton, who's definitely not a Pokemon, and visiting scholar Max Concurrent. Oh, Maximum at the same time is what your parents should have named you. If you want to join the facility, if you want to get a lab coat, get on the staff, you want to talk to me in our Discord, give me episode ideas, get episodes early, join our Magic the Gathering League, D&D nights, all this great nerdy stuff, you can join at patreon.com/Kyle Hill right now. And if you support the facility just enough, you get your name on RA here.
I highly recommend you go do that. I highly recommend you go check out his channel. If you like it, check out his Patreon.
Yeah.
Do all the things for him, because
not
he's supplying the video.
These accidents
Check
and their
them out.
stories. As I've been saying for weeks, you know my thoughts on nuclear weapons. They're terrible, terribly destructive. I don't think we should ever use them. I don't think we should even have them. If you want to know more of my
Nuclear weapons are something that humanity wishes we could uninvent. And I agree with Kyle. They must never, ever be used again.
thoughts, you can go to the end of history video back on the channel. And look, I could lighten the mood here with some, hey, it's fun Kyle Science Guy factoid, but I'm not going to.
No, this is serious.
I could tell you that according to a recent study, platypuses are fluorescent, but I wouldn't say that. I want you to sit here and think about it. I wouldn't say anything ridiculous like that about platypubes.
So there we go, the Demon Core. A perfect example of the dangers of nuclear radiation. Now, I firmly believe that the peaceful applications of nuclear energy are fantastic and are limitless, and we need to explore that further. I have lived the majority of my life 30 miles away from a nuclear power plant, have never had one incident at all. It it needs more money for R&D, and it needs to get rid of the stigma attached to it. But yeah, nuclear energy is very dangerous. It's, it's almost like human kryptonite. It destroys our DNA. So it's very dangerous, and its power is awesome to behold. So I hope you liked the video. I will see you guys next time. Take care, and bye-bye.